All right, welcome back. Up next, we have the Orbital Spaceflight panel. And orbital spaceflight has been restricted pretty much to only the wealthiest government programs since it's been a concept, basically. And the panels will now be discussing more commercial companies and what these companies are doing to open up Earth orbit to general public. The moderator for this panel will be Dennis Stone, who is an assistant manager for commercial space development in NASA's Commercial Crew and Cargo Program, which manages the COTS initiative. Dennis Stone.
Thank you very much. Well, this builds very well on the last panel, which dealt with opening the suborbital to a wide variety of markets. And so now we're going to take it to the next level, literally, to LEO, and talk about not only the new services that are going to become available to open LEO, but also hopefully the markets and the demands for those services. And so we have a very, very distinguished panel, and I'm going to follow Alan Stern's paradigm and let each one introduce themselves, starting with Phil.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. My name's Phil McAllister, and since February, I have been leading the planning at NASA headquarters for the Commercial Crew Initiative. So we've been busy trying to flesh that out and to put sort of meat on the bones as to what that program is, and I'll talk a little bit about that in my prepared remarks. In terms of my background, I have always been affiliated with the commercial space industry, even though this is my first time at this conference. But the two notable things with respect to sort of commercial crew that I was involved in historically was I was at Futron actually when we did the Futron-Zogby survey, so I oversaw that and was manager of that development effort and that survey and the forecast that we did. So that gave me a lot of insight into the demand for human space transportation. And then last year I was the NASA liaison to the Augustine Committee, so I was able to hear all the deliberations, participate in all the fact-finding associated with the Augustine Committee, which really set, in my opinion, set the stage for change that we needed in our human spaceflight program. So.
Very good.
Hi, good morning. I'm Mark Sarangelo. I run Sierra Nevada Space Systems, and I'm also the chairman of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. And primarily today I'm going to be speaking to those two topics, where we are in our program. We were one of the award winners under the Commercial Crew Development Program, and we've been working that for a number of months now, and been working our orbital space vehicle program for about 5 years. I'll bring you up to date as to what where that is and what it's going to be looking like and what the prospects are, and also speak a little bit to the commercial spaceflight industry and where that is as a status.
So I'm Jim Muncy. I'm a space policy consultant in Washington. I'm one of the 3 co-founders of the Space Frontier Foundation. I'm not going to be speaking on behalf of any clients, although I do have clients that are working in the orbital human spaceflight arena. I'm going to try to I'm supposed to talk a little bit more about the political environment and policy environment and what's been going on in the last 6 to 7 months since the President's budget came out, and hopefully point some directions towards where we might go going forward so that commercial crew can move forward.
Well, very good. And so we'll follow a similar model as the last panel. We'll give a few remarks, have some discussion among ourselves, and then open the floor to questions, and perhaps maybe a final minute of wrap-up comments each. So I don't think I need to say anything in the way of context about the importance of getting to orbit and reducing the cost, increasing the reliability. I mean, that's certainly one of the great mantras of this organization, and so that would be preaching to the choir if I did that. But I think that's really our mindset. You know, I work in the Commercial Crew and Cargo Program, or C3PO, as we affectionately call it. Actually, when we started, it was being called the Commercial Crew and Cargo Program, CCCP. And okay, so some of you are old enough to understand the negative connotations of that brand. So I asked Alan Lindemoyer, I said, "Are we in office?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "Oh, well, then let's call ourselves C3PO." So anyway, that's stuck. Anyway, and so we do several things, just kind of an introduction. We run the COTS program, Commercial Orbital Transportation Services, and I think most of you know what that is, so I won't belabor you with the details, but we have two funded partners, SpaceX and Orbital Sciences Corporation. We have a $500 million fund, and we treat that as an investment in the capabilities of the private sector. And then this International Space Station program then has purchased services from them. So we're an investor, and we're a customer. Now, Alan mentioned that Sir Richard, when he heard that they were going to buy tickets, was shining his shoes. And I don't think Elon Musk or David Thompson have shined any shoes. But anyway, be that as it may, that's certainly not one of the requirements of the program. But if they want to shine our shoes, I mean, certainly welcome to. But no, but they both are performing really well. As you know, the Falcon 9 had a very, very successful maiden launch recently. Their first COTS demo flight is coming up here. I think it's scheduled for September. And so they have 3 demos leading up to a test to the space station. Orbital Sciences doing a similar program, one test flight. They started later. We funded them later, but they're doing really, really well. They're building a launch site at Wallops, and they're making excellent progress. So COTS cargo is going well, and as I say, Station has given them both very large contracts to deliver lots of cargo that we need on the space station for a several-year period. So this is it's an interesting model. It's a new model for NASA. Again, when Mike Griffin set up, we have $500 million, and he fenced that very well for commercial cargo. We treated it as an investment. We hired a venture capitalist to help us think like an investor. We built agreements based on the Space Act and the special authority that NASA has with milestones, and they build and test and fly, we pay incrementally, even financial milestones. If they're going to go raise money and have skin in the game, great, well, show us the deposit in the bank and we'll pay you as well. So all of that's negotiated in advance. And so it's been working quite well. So that's a $500 million program we manage. And then we also got $50 million of stimulus money. And as Mark mentioned, there's a commercial crew development program, which is basically beginning to work with the industry to mature their concepts and technologies. And so we have five partners in addition to the fine work that the Sierra Nevada is doing. And actually, you're the largest recipient of funding under that program, I might note. We also have the United Launch Alliance working on emergency detection system for the Atlas V and Delta IV, one of the steps that might be necessary to human rate those vehicles. Boeing is developing, I think Jim mentioned this in his opening remarks, a capsule that could be launched on any of those vehicles, and Bob Bigelow is one of their partners. Blue Origin, a company you may know of, founded by Amazon's Jeff Bezos. They're also a partner. They're working on some technologies of mutual interest, and of course they've got their eye on suborbital and then orbital, and so they're definitely an interesting player. And also Paragon, more at a subsystem level. They're working on some innovative life support technologies, and all this under stimulus money that we have for this year. So, and also using these Space Act agreements with the same paradigm of pay-as-you-go milestones. So this kind of sets a stage as we can talk about cargo, we can talk about crew, and we can talk about really any orbital space transportation issues that we want to get to today. So let's let our panelists have a few moments to give some remarks. Phil, we'll start with you.
Okay. Thanks, Dennis. Amazingly, I only have one slide, and it's just a graphic, so hopefully we can get that up soon. And we're still tweaking it. There it is. Can't quite get all of it. When we started the planning for this commercial crew program, we felt like we wanted to have a vision of where we were trying to get to eventually in the future, and that's why we developed this graphic. You can see where we're trying to integrate
spaceflight operations. You can see the two different launch pads in the back with sort of ongoing routine aircraft aviation flights, and the space station up in the upper right-hand corner, because that is, for NASA, the near-term milestone. So the Commercial Crew Program, if it gets approved by Congress, is designed to invest in the capability to transport humans to and from low Earth orbit. And once that capability is matured and shown to be safe, reliable, and cost-effective, NASA hopes to be a partner, a customer in the near term to purchase those services to transport our crew up and down from the International Space Station. So those are the three safe, reliable, and cost-effective. Those are the three sort of legs of the stool that we feel are very important for this program that need to be accomplished. So again, the vision is routine access to space for humans. We've been talking about that for decades, and I truly believe that the Commercial Crew Program is the next step in that direction. If we're successful, and there are a lot of challenges associated with this, both internal to NASA, external to our stakeholders, the technology, the business case, there's lots of challenges associated with this, but if we are successful, a lot of benefits are going to flow. We believe this will strengthen the International Space Station program, because it gives us another way to transport crew to and from space station. To dovetail on some of the remarks that we heard earlier today, we have this great space station. We need to be able to use it, and the way to use it is to have transportation for humans up and down. So we think it'll strengthen the International Space Station. It'll allow NASA to focus on beyond LEO. It will enhance our industrial base, contribute to the national economy, world peace. Okay, world peace may be going a little bit too far. But other than world peace, all those other things I do think are appropriate and would come to bear if we are successful. I'm going to really restrict my comments today to two areas, but I'm really looking forward to hearing what your questions are and happy to address those. The two issues that I get hit with most often are the business case for commercial crew and safety. So I'm just going to spend a couple minutes on that. In terms of the business case, I cannot, with a high confidence, say that we've got an analysis, a study that closes the business case for commercial crew. In any business case, you need the supply and you need the demand. These systems do not exist yet, so we don't know how much they're going to cost right now. We've got estimates. We're looking for our commercial providers to put forward some good, high-quality proposals in the future if the program gets approved. But today, not really sure on the supply side how much these systems are going to cost, so it's very difficult to definitively say for NASA that the business case can close. But what we can say is that there is demand for human space transportation to and from low Earth orbit. That is a historical fact. So when I hear comments in the media of this, future predicted market, I have to say I don't agree with that, because historically NASA and Russia have flown astronauts from other countries since 1978. And since that time, over that 30-year period, we have launched, both between NASA and Russia, almost 100 astronauts from other countries. That averages about 3 a year. In addition, we've seen the space flight participant market, otherwise known as space tourism, since 2001. 8 people have flown to space, including 1 reflight. So it was 9-person flights, so that equates to about 1 person per year. And if you look at it, NASA's demand right now, and we're still tweaking this, we look like we are going to need about 8 flights, 8-person flights a year, with another 4 from other markets. That's a 50% increase. That's a pretty good demand. Those aren't huge numbers, but the demand is real, and you can point to it. In addition, you've got Bigelow Aerospace that has spent reported $180 million on their inflatable modules. That would be another destination for these crew transportation services. Bigelow has estimated 6 flights per year initially, ramping up to 100 by the end of the decade. So that's obviously a very robust indicator of demand for human spaceflight services. In addition, with our CCDEV procurements or Space Act agreements that you heard earlier, NASA received over 30 proposals from U.S. aerospace industry for those Space Act agreements. So that shows, again, a very robust interest level on the part of U.S. aerospace to supply systems for commercial crew. But the biggest and, in my opinion, strongest indicator, I characterize all these as positive indicators, was the decision on the part of the administration to extend the life of the International Space Station likely to 2020 and beyond. So for the first time in history, we have a real, reliable, sustainable market for human space transportation services. And I think that was the key to enable this program to go forward, and one of the factors that played into the administration's decision to go forward with the Commercial Crew Program. So that is sort of the demand side of the equation. In terms of safety, that is another area that a lot of people have talked about. And there's several factors why we believe that that we can accomplish this safely. First off, the mission is much simpler than what NASA was embarking on previously with the Constellation program. This is really just geared for up and down space transportation, possibly crew rescue services as well. This is something that we did in the United States 30 years ago with Gemini. That was the closest analog to this. So it's, human spaceflight, I don't know if it'll ever be truly routine, but this is a relatively well understood mission and relatively simple compared to the program of record that we were working on before, which really was focusing on beyond LEO and a lunar mission as well. So it's a fairly simple mission, again, one that we demonstrated in the U.S. over 30 years ago, so we feel like that is a key factor. Also, whatever launch vehicles that are ultimately chosen are going to have a demonstrated flight history of reliability. So we're not going to be launching any crews on an unproven rocket that just has maybe a probabilistic risk assessment that says it's this safe. There's going to have to be demonstrated reliability through the test program that we're going to have as part of the Commercial Crew Program to give NASA and the crew and the provider the confidence that these systems are safe. In addition, NASA will be intimately involved in the development of these systems. A lot of people have characterized this as hands-off. It is not going to be hands-off. NASA is going to be very, again, intimately involved in understanding the nature of the program, the nature of these systems. What we're not going to be intimately involved in is telling the provider how to do it. We're trying very hard to set up this program where we establish high-level goals for what we want and allowing the commercial providers the maximum flexibility to achieve those goals. So if you look at previous human spaceflight programs on the part of NASA, we owned the system, we owned every major decision, and we were almost in this continuous oversight mode where we were continually telling the contractor how to do their job and what specific technologies to use, subsystems to use, even component level to use. That is not going to be the way we envision executing this program. We will be intimately involved in understanding the nature of the program, but allowing the providers, the commercial providers, and again, you can see I don't call them contractors. These are partners for us because we're investing in them. The commercial providers, the maximum flexibility to achieve those goals as we go forward. So we feel like that's a big key factor for the cost effectiveness of it, but will also enable us to understand the true nature and almost better than the way we did it before, which was relying on stacks and stacks of documentation at major design reviews where we would give, NASA people would come in with hundreds of people, review those documents, and send, hundreds, sometimes thousands of comments back to the contractor on how to change things. We do not envision doing that as part of the Commercial Crew Program. We would be, some of our civil servants will be embedded into the contractors' locations where they're doing this design and development work so that we can see the test results, we can witness the raw data and get a true understanding of that program, but we will have discrete oversight milestones. So we will not be in this continuous mode where we're continually telling them what to do. It will be discrete points where we will evaluate them and see if they have met the requirements of the milestones. Again, we are going to we're fashioning this program very similar to the COTS Cargo program where we have pre-negotiated milestones. So when they meet a milestone and we all agree that they meet a milestone, they get paid. It's not on a cost-plus basis. We feel like a cost-plus contracting environment is not consistent with a Commercial Crew Program. And so we envision, we haven't actually laid our acquisition strategy to bed yet, but we envision potentially using this other transactional authority, Space Act agreements, or fixed price contracting mechanisms for this service. So those are the two things that I definitely wanted to hit today. And again, I'm really looking forward to your questions. I hope they're hard because I like answering the hard questions. This is a fairly friendly audience for Commercial Crew. But if you guys have heard anything that you're curious about and how we're addressing it, be happy to take those questions on. Thank you.
Good morning. While that's going up, I'd like to start my talk just by providing a little bit of definition. As I mentioned, I run Sierra Nevada Space Systems, but I'm also currently the chairman of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, and one of the things that we've been doing this past year is spending an awful lot of time trying to define and explain what that means. And there's so many different views and so many different points of reference to it. It's really a very simple thing. What we believe that we're doing differently is not in the companies. We hear all the time that, well, these are startup companies working out of a garage. They've never done anything in space before. They're not safe. All these long list of things. And what I'm going to try to do today in the next few minutes is really address that by virtue of two things. One, by explaining what we're doing as commercial space, and then secondly, using my own company as an example of how we're going about doing this particular program. Really, on the commercial space side, every company that's worked with NASA is a commercial company. The only difference really is in the contracting method. You go back to the 50s and when NASA first started, NASA itself has never really built a vehicle all on its own. It's always used contractors in some form or fashion. So really the difference here is quite simple. The difference is instead of being a cost-plus contractor, as Phil mentioned, we're willing to do things in a different way. Under a contract that's a milestone-based contract, that means we get paid as we go along. The second thing that's different is that we're willing to co-invest. We're putting up our own money alongside the government. So instead of the government spending all of its own money, we're spending a good part of our money. In my company's case, we're more than exceeding NASA's investment. So for every dollar NASA is giving us, we're putting in more than NASA is putting in, which means we're pretty well motivated to make this work. The third thing is that instead of being as cost-plus contracts often are, there's little motivation to bring things in on schedule or on budget. And when you're dealing with a scenario where you're doing a fixed price contract, which at the end of the day means that we're providing a service at a price, we're interested to get to that service as soon as possible in as safe as possible manner. And you know what? Right now, NASA is doing that currently. Our contract with the Russians is a commercial contract on a fixed price basis to provide a service. What we're simply saying is, cannot U.S. industry, cannot the people in this industry do the same thing that we're contracting out to Russia? Bring those jobs home to this country, be able to reinvest in America. We have a long-standing industry with a lot of abilities to do things, and we think and believe that that's the case, that we can accomplish that. As to safety, we oftentimes smile about that because at the end of the day, no one is going to fly on any vehicle of any type unless they pass the flight standards. It's no different than building an airplane, which is where I came from. You're building an airplane that's going to require a certain amount of standards and requirements from the FAA and other agencies before that airplane can take off. The space industry, in my view, is going to be the same thing. And those standards are going to apply to anyone, whether or not they're done as a government contract or whether or not they're done as a commercial provider or whether or not they're done as an international provider. Strangely enough, if you go back right now, we do not subject the Soyuz program to those standards. So as we're going forward, the idea of safety is really a non-question. If we don't pass the set standards that NASA and other agencies are going to put together, like the FAA, we're not going to fly. And at the end of the day, if we don't fly, we've lost an awful lot of our own investment and our money. So we're going to make sure we meet those standards. If I could turn to give you a little bit of view of Sierra Nevada has been around since the 1960s. It's been under current management since the 1990s. We're a little over $1 billion in revenue. We're in 35 locations and over 2,200 people. A company that has the resources to be able to do the job. Our space group is broken into 4 different parts. We are one of the leading providers of small satellites in the world right now. We're one of the top providers of components and subsystems to large programs, large satellite programs, as well as interplanetary programs. We are a rocket motor provider in a number of different ways and specialized rocket motors, and we're developing a space vehicle that we call the Dream Chaser. We've been doing this for quite a long time, 22 years of work. We've flown on over 300 missions now to space, 313 missions. We're flying about once every 6 weeks now, and have built something in the order of over 3,000 mechanisms, subsystems, and satellites, all of which have worked on orbit. We know how to build things for space, as do other companies who are doing this kind of work. The programs vary. We've been to Mars a number of times on a number of different programs, and many of you probably have seen or worked on these programs. We are a leading provider of small satellites, and I put this slide up here for a reason. We currently have a backlog of many dozens of small satellites that we're building, and one of the things that Phil raised in his talk was the market. As we look to the market, it's not just a market, in our company's case, for bringing things back and forth to the space station. There are other things we can do in space, not the least of which is servicing in space. As the shuttle retires, there is really no way that we're going to be able to, at this current time, do significant servicing of LEO. Servicing in terms of deploying satellites, potentially bringing those satellites home. And as you'll see as I go into my talk, the vehicle that we have is quite well suited for that. So the commercial market is beyond, we think, just the markets that may bring people to space. There are other things that we can do with these vehicles. We are the prime motor contractor for the Virgin Galactic Spaceship 2 program. The motor that we're building is the motor that will be taking the Spaceship 2 on its journey and its flights. We're well into that development program. And as a result of that, we have accumulated quite a lot of experience, not only on this program, but other rocket motor programs, and understanding how to develop rocket motors that function well in this kind of environment, and also are reusable, which is a big issue of our program. I'd like to spend the next couple of minutes before I go off and give you a sense of where we are in our space vehicle program we call the Dream Chaser. This is what it looks like. It is a 7-passenger or 7-crew vehicle. It could be set up as all crew, it could be set up as all cargo, and it has multiple missions. The view of this vehicle is that it is a vertical takeoff, horizontal landing vehicle that has the ability, as we take pages out of a lot of industry, we want to be able to have one vehicle that can provide multiple missions. Much like Boeing builds a 747 that can be a crew, all passenger vehicle, can be all cargo, can fight fires, can do all sorts of things. By having a vehicle that has multiple missions and multiple purposes, we expand our market, which is really important in this early days in the commercial world, because we want to have as big a market as possible. The team we have is an extraordinary team. We, unlike what you might hear, these are companies and the teams and the other teams that are involved in the NASA programs are similarly situated. We've reached out to get the best of the industry, and this is best of large aerospace companies as well as small aerospace companies, as well as reaching out to universities and education, because we feel that's a very important part of our future. On our team for this program is United Launch Alliance. We have Draper Labs, which has been on every manned spaceflight program since the early 60s. Boeing Phantom Works, who is a significant provider of space and aerospace activities. McDonnell Detweiler, which many of you have known from building the arms that are on the space station and on the shuttle, a huge space flight experience. We also have Colorado University. It's really great for us to see the excitement and the level of interest that the students have. We have several dozen students from CU who are on our program. And I got to tell you, they bring more energy to us than we ever thought we would ever get. And it's really stimulating. And we have, in many of our programs, we have about 60 active programs in our group, reached out and have a component where we have students and even down to high school level who are working with us with the idea that not only do they see the future in aerospace, but I have to tell you, they bring an energy to our team which makes us more excited about what we're doing. The other interesting thing about our team is that we actually have three NASA centers now. 2 are on the chart, but we've reached out and are paying NASA to help us get information. And this is all part of the long-term plan, that these relationships are two-way streets, that not only are we as a company looking for help from the government, but we're also providing opportunities for government people to work on our programs, which we pay for. Our program actually is not a new program. It goes back well into the last century. Originally started as a Russian space program. NASA picked up this design of doing this type of vehicle in the 70s and 80s and spent about 10 years working on it under a program name called the HL-20. We picked it up in the 90s and have been working on it ever since, but the history of the program goes back many years, and it's not a new program. One of the things we hear is that what you're doing has never been done before, and really that's not the case. As you'll see, there's a lot of heritage already existing in these vehicles. We're flying on an Atlas V. Instead of designing our own launch vehicle, we said, why not look out there, and we have. And the vehicle itself is actually launch agnostic, meaning that it can be launched on multiple kinds of vehicles. We're starting with the Atlas V because we think it's the best choice. It's flown now over 22 times. Would have flown 30 or 40 times by the time we put people on it. In our view, that's a pretty safe history and a pretty good history of understanding it. The vehicle can be launched on top. Our vehicle can be launched on top of an Atlas V. We spent a couple of years looking at that particular issue and have developed no concerns with being able to do that. It eliminates quite a lot of things that have plagued the shuttle program over the years. We are well into the program. We've been doing this for a number of years. We're actually constructing the vehicle now. We're expecting to start doing tests within the next year or so, and we have a orbital test program date of 2014. This is not a program that's going to take 10 years to get to. The idea behind what we're doing is not only servicing the ISS, but also doing things like being able to do satellite repair and deployment, potentially bringing things home. There's certainly military variants off of a piloted spacecraft like this that could happen. It could be operate unmanned as well as piloted if it needed to. But interestingly enough, one of the things that have been coming up to me was when you're running a business, sometimes it's the things you don't anticipate. But what we realize, part of what we have in the industry, we have a paradox that's been here forever, and that is it's very difficult to get something to fly in space unless you have heritage, and it's very difficult to get heritage unless you can fly. And we run into that problem all the time, and what I've been getting is a lot more phone calls than I've ever realized about saying we can actually use this vehicle to be an orbital test bed, to be able to take things up, to do things, to test people's products, to be able to bring them back home. And the interesting thing is because it lands on a runway, and it lands on any runway, really, 10,000-foot runway, the experiment or the device to very little return pressure. And as a result of that, we think that there's a very big market for that. Concurrently, one of the big problems with the space station, we've heard it's going to hopefully be extended, is that there is no real planned way to bring stuff home right now. The cargo vehicles that go up there don't come home. The Soyuz, which does come home, if anyone's ever seen a Soyuz capsule, you have to be relatively small to get into it, and there's no really room to bring home any of the major experiments. So if we're going to have a successful program on the space station, our view, and one of the reasons we got into this design as a vehicle, was that we wanted to be able to bring things home in as benign as possible environment. We fly home, we land on a runway, we come home at less than 2 Gs, we can take racks directly from the space station and bring them in. And if you're doing sensitive experiments in space and you're spending what has been $100 billion to build the space station and many more billions to keep it up there, you want to be able to use it as well as possible. So we were targeting a market that was not only just delivering crews back and forth, but also what can we do in LEO and how could we extend the environment of the space station as much as possible. We are in construction of the vehicle right now. These are photos that were taken in the last few months where we're actually building the tooling to build it. It's a composite vehicle, and it's well under its way. You'll see that's the pressurized center tool. It's exciting because after many years of development, we can actually go out and touch something. And I have to tell any of you who've been in this industry long enough, the difference between paper and touching something is amazing. We do it all the time. We've built a lot of stuff in space, but when something is personal like this is, you're able to actually get to a point of seeing it being built. It makes all the difference in the world. We also are well in our methods for rocket motor production for this particular vehicle. It will carry rockets. It will carry the same hybrid rockets that we're using for the Spaceship Two program. So we're having dual use for that. The use of hybrid rockets, for those of you who don't know, it's a base of rubber is the fuel, and nitrous oxide is the oxidizer. So recycled tires and laughing gas, I used to say. But it's a very effective motor for this kind of application, because we are able to restart it and do things in space. It is a reusable motor, restartable motor, and throttleable motor. So it has some very good benefits for this particular program. And this is what you see in the testing program. So I'm going to end up on that, and I'd like to welcome any questions, but we're quite excited about what we're doing. And I also want to say as I'm closing that none of this could be possible without the support of NASA and the people on the stage here. It's not easy to do something new. It takes a lot of courage to stand up and try to make change. And the change here is not as dramatic as people like to think. U.S. industry has been doing things like this for many, many years. We believe we can do it. We believe we can do it at least as well as foreign competitors can do it, and using U.S. resources in building an industry. So I'd like to thank you for the time today, and I appreciate your listening to us, and I'll be happy to take any questions I can later.
Thank you, Mark. Jim? Do you have slides? Of course not.
I'm going to try to be brief and give us more time for interaction and discussion. Let me briefly just try to sort of cover the state of play regarding commercial crew and this federal effort to enable commercial orbital human spaceflight. As everyone knows, the Augustine Committee, in all of its options that it put forth for the administration going forward, all of the options except for the program of record options indicated that the most cost-effective and early schedule arrival way of meeting the requirement for U.S. human access to low Earth orbit for ISS was commercial. They didn't get into whether Ares 1 was a good idea or a bad idea. They didn't really get into, attacking or criticizing technical options at all. But they just said, schedule-wise, it doesn't work. By the time that you get there, in order to be able to afford doing it, you end up not having ISS for it to visit. And so they laid it out. And from talking to multiple members of the commission, they really didn't think that coming to that conclusion was going to be that controversial. Unfortunately, they were wrong about that. The president's budget actually paid attention to the commission. We always talk about commissions and, they gather dust and they don't get paid attention to. Not this time. The White House clearly paid attention, not just to the key, the high-level arguments that Augustine made, but to a lot of the detailed ideas they presented. And they very clearly chose one of the options as going forward. Specifically, they thought that it was important enough to change the dynamic of how we get to low Earth orbit in this country to not just invest the minimum amount that Augustine laid out of roughly $2.5 billion with some cost growth risk margin on that, but instead said we should invest essentially $6 billion over 5 years in commercial crew. Given the juxtaposition of that against the cancellation of Constellation and not actually initiating any government-owned and operated human spaceflight system for beyond Earth orbit, really ended up causing a lot of heartache, I think, for the people on the inside at NASA and in industry who were trying to make this work and make this happen as the best way to solve the need for low Earth orbit, separate and apart from whatever you do beyond Earth orbit. So we've had 6 months of yelling and screaming, at least. And depending on which committee of Congress you talk to, different levels and different levels of hysteria, et cetera, et cetera. Ranging, I'll start with the worst. The House Science Committee, the committee I used to work for, really wants Constellation back. And the bill they produced this week, marked up yesterday, basically tries to restore Constellation. Now, they don't provide Constellation the funding that Constellation had previously budgeted or the funding that Augustine said it was necessary to actually carry it out and make it executable. They limit commercial orbital human spaceflight investments to $50 million per year over 5 years, plus what they thought was an ingenious idea of using loan guarantees to subsidize the development of commercial capabilities. That's just a really bad idea. Loan guarantees work where you have a marketable, fungible commodity like a boat or a house, and you are guaranteeing basically the financing on that, and if the loan falls through, there's something to sell. Funding, using that to fund development is problematic in lots of different ways. So they really don't think that it's important. Now, 2 years ago, it was the House Science Committee along with the Senate Commerce Committee that enacted into law NASA authorization that mandated that NASA go forth and issue a notice of intent to award 2 or more commercial crew development contracts. So it was not a little more than 18 months ago that they had a different position. But when given a choice between commercial and a government system as opposed to both, they decided they wanted the government system and not a commercial system. The House appropriators have been silent. They basically said they were going to listen to the authorizers and let everyone else go fight amongst themselves before they would take a position. The Senate Commerce Committee last week marked up a legislation that tried to set a balance between government systems and commercial systems. They provided, after an amendment was offered by Senator Warner from Virginia, ended up providing $300 million the first year and $500 million each of the second years. That's approximately half of what was budgeted by the president over those 3 years. They also provided some restrictive language as to when NASA could enter into contracts to actually start developing. They said that the first year's funding basically has to be for extensions of the current CC Dev activity, and they really aren't supposed to start a contract until you've done all these safety reviews and other things. There's just no way to say this. I don't understand why, if you are worried about the gap in U.S. human spaceflight and having to pay Russia for space goods and services and effectively exporting our jobs to Russia, why you would say you can't even start for a year. There's just, I don't know how to nicely say that that's not stupid, because it is stupid. The Senate appropriators largely took the Senate authorizers guidance. They ended up only providing $250 million in the first year, and they only appropriate year by year. What all this means, we're not going to have an actual appropriation bill for NASA until probably after the election. So there will be a continuing resolution that is in place for some number of months. Hopefully the White House will engage in a more forceful manner in negotiations down the road once we're past the election. And we will get some level of funding with some restrictions. It will be what comes out of the process. It is mind-boggling to me that I mean, even though we've gotten ourselves into this terrible situation where it's commercial LEO versus government beyond LEO, as if the first doesn't in fact enable the latter, because that's exactly what is true. I don't know if it's going to be possible to reframe the debate between now and then to clarify this. Next year, we're going to have a different debate than the one we had this year. Some of the things that have been said are downright just idiotic. Let me deal with the less idiotic arguments first. Saying, well, the only way commercial will work is if there's a huge private market. That's actually not true. Commercial is cheaper than a government system, not because there's a leveraging, not just because there's a leveraging of public resources with private resources in order to pursue private revenue. That's one of the reasons commercial is cheaper than an all-government approach. But the other reasons it's cheaper is that we're setting, as Phil said, we're setting a Gemini standard, not an Apollo standard, okay? It's a simpler, easier challenge than what Orion is supposed to be able to do. We're operating under fixed price, which means that the company is motivated to find economies and ways of saving money, as opposed to motivated to spend as much money as possible to earn the maximum possible fee, which is just the reality of how cost-plus contracting works. And finally, commercial companies are always motivated to find private customers. They're always motivated to find new markets and new opportunities, but you don't have to prove that those exist. I mean, commercial entities, commercial entrepreneurs will actually take risks. The argument's been made that, well, there's only been 8 commercial human space flights or customers in the last decade, and the Futron study there said there were supposed to be a lot more than that, so clearly there really isn't a market, so clearly commercial can't possibly work. Sort of the illogical extension of the previous argument. The fact is that every single seat that has been made available on the Soyuz has been sold. Okay? The problem has not been a lack of demand, the problem has been a lack of supply. And therefore, investing in commercial crew will in fact create a new private, dynamic private commercial industry. And we don't know how big it's going to be, but until we have more supply and until we have domestic supply and affordable supply, we aren't going to know how big it's going to be. The last argument I will bring up is just this wacky argument that this is privatizing the Army. I don't know how to say it any differently. We take Army officers and we fly them on Southwest to Fort Bragg or some other location from which they embark to the war. And they catch a commercial flight, a regular commercial flight that has regular civilians on it. They then get on a Delta plane or an American plane that's hired under the Civil Reserve Air Fleet contracts that the Air Force has to purchase flights by commercial aircraft to fly military passengers. So it's still a commercial aircraft flying all the way into theater. Maybe not right into the forward, not to the forward locations, but into the Gulf. And only then do they get on board an Air Force owned or Army owned and operated aircraft. Into low Earth orbit in the shallow water. There's just something wrong. I mean, the deliciousness of the rhetoric is just bonkers. That we are clinging to this government-only approach. It just makes no sense. The other people on the panel aren't allowed to say what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying it. So they don't have to. Okay? But it's just amazing. And when you hear it in the press, you all have an existential responsibility to go challenge it wherever you hear it. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. Well, we've had a very good overview so far of NASA's plans for commercial crew, the industry perspective, Mark's company is really out there in front doing exactly what we had in mind in the COTS arena, and Jim on the political perspective. And we're certainly not limited to talk about commercial crew here, but that does seem to be the topic. Ask the panelists to give me maybe a quick answer to a couple questions. What would be, in your mind, the definition of a successful outcome of the commercial crew program? Bill, let me start with you.
That's easy, since we had to set the objectives, and if we meet those objectives, that would be successful. So we would like more than one provider of low Earth orbit human space transportation capability. So we would definitely like more than one. If we just get one and that's all that we can get, then so be it. But we would like to have more than one, and we would like that system to be able to not only deliver our astronauts to and from the International Space Station, but also to deliver other people for other purposes to other locations at low Earth orbit.
Fair enough. Mark, how would you define success?
I would add to that and agree with it, but I would also perhaps say that jobs in America as opposed to jobs outside of America. I think that the idea of multiple providers is what builds an industry, not just a single provider. But also I would say a vibrant partnership between government and the commercial industry. The main point we drive home is that we're not trying to displace. All of us love the space industry, and we love the idea of going somewhere else, be it to the moon, Lagrange, or to Mars. And having the ability to lower costs to go to the low Earth orbit and to the station allows for more money to be spent on those exciting journeys.
Jim?
I will echo exactly what everyone's already said and simply say we need to, this is perhaps one of the most important barriers that needs to be broken and can be broken since John Glenn flew. This notion, there's no question that Mike Melville changed the world in 2004 with the X-1 flight. But the fact is that if we can show that a new paradigm of private industry working with the government to achieve a capability can not only work, not only be affordable, and not only deliver more results to the taxpayer, but also enable the government to go do what the government is uniquely capable of and hopefully challenged to go do, a lot of these arguments will stop happening, okay? And we just need to push through and get it done. And hopefully, once it happens, it'll change the game.
Very good. Now, the question is, what are some of the risks to achieving those successful outcomes? Phil, what keeps you up at night?
Oh, geez. There's so many. I don't believe, personally, that the biggest risks associated with getting a successful service the biggest risks are technical. I believe that U.S. industry, as evidenced by Mark's company, as well as the other companies that we got that will probably play in this program, are capable of doing this. So I do believe that it is sort of on the business side, which is why competition is so critical to our strategy, which is why the funding is also important. We need to have multiple providers. We would like to have a portfolio of systems that can launch our astronauts and other people to and from low Earth orbit. So I see the business side of the equation as the most difficult and the biggest challenge. And the way we mitigate that at NASA in our plans were to have and fund multiple providers through the development phase, and then hopefully have 2 or more in the services phase, which is why I'm so concerned with some of the new marks that we're getting out of some of the subcommittees. It's really going to challenge us to be able to have multiple providers with those kinds of monies. We don't want to have to be all in on one system. That doesn't build an industry, as Mark likes to say. I think that's a great line. It just builds a system. It sort of goes back to the way we were before. So that's what I see as the biggest challenge.
Very good. Very good. Mark, what are your thoughts on that?
I think from the company perspective, it sounds a little bit arrogant, but I believe that our companies can build these systems. Orbital, SpaceX, ourselves, and others are building and flying things. We don't think, it's not that it's not hard or difficult, we don't think that's really the challenge. The biggest challenge on our side is uncertainty, and uncertainty specifically around regulation. We're in the process of building things right now. If we don't know what it is, what standards we're building towards, or what we're going to be asked to accomplish at the end of the day, it's going to be quite difficult for us to understand that. And so what we're trying to do is make sure whatever safety regulations, whatever flight regulations there are, that they're known as soon as possible so that we can properly design those controls and those systems into our spacecraft and not find that out 4 or 5 years down the road after we've already built and started flying.
Good. Jim, what are you worried about on commercial crew?
That the Republican Party will screw it up, being my party.
We should take notes that he said
No,
that.
let's not. I think it's a risk that the White House will give up and not fight for their vision. Obviously, these aren't risks that we can necessarily do anything about, but they're risks we have to try to plan for and deal with. The other risk is just that we don't do everything we can do. And I'm not talking about the companies now, and I'm not talking about the NASA officials who are running the program. I'm talking about the rest of us. Not do everything we can do to make it clear that this is not, I mean, it is a revolution, but it's not a revolution. This is how we do everything else. Why should it be any different? Okay? Why should it be different for launching people to space? It doesn't have to be different, and if it is different, when the entitlement crunch comes in a couple of years, there won't be any funding for any human spaceflight. And if we haven't invested and we haven't started to change the dynamic and change the paradigm, if it's still just about pork, there may not be enough corn left to plant as seed corn, let alone make popcorn and do all the other things that people seem to want to do with it.
It does seem to be a narrow window we have here, an unusual one. Are there any questions you'd like to ask each other?
I was just going to say that, Dennis. Since this is all about being different, commercial crew, we can make it different now. I actually have a question for Jim, in that once the space shuttle retires, most likely the next U.S. flagged vehicle that has humans on it are going to come out of the commercial crew program. And that's I said that all dramatically, but I do believe that's true. Given where we are at NASA, I believe once the space shuttle retires sometime in next year, the next U.S. flagged vehicle with humans on it will be out of the commercial crew program. Given that, what happened to all the concern associated with the gap? Last year, the gap was everything. We got to close the gap, and now nobody seems to be concerned about that anymore. What happened to that concern?
You're asking for intellectual consistency?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd say the wrong town to expect that from.
Remember, you're out of Washington.
Listen, as the Mind the Gap manager for the Space Frontier Foundation that was out there with press releases on that very topic all last year and early this year, the fact is that ultimately there are always going to be some politicians who don't care about the result. Or the result they care about is jobs in their district, and that's all they care about, okay? And it's Churchill said it, it's the worst possible system except for all the others, okay? So I wish, what I really do think is a cancer of space just being about pork, just being about white-collar welfare, just being about jobs in aerospace states, to say it more euphemistically, that cancer has metastasized. And I don't think there is, I can't believe, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when I worked on the staff of the House Science Committee, we occasionally would talk about political considerations, But we were always talking about what's the best approach for space. What's the best approach for U.S. leadership in space and other things like that. And now that rhetoric may appear a little bit, but you don't see anything like the intellectual honesty or the rigor or stuff that we, and I'm not saying this to toot my own horn because I wasn't necessarily effective at it, but you know, I don't see that many members of Congress who give a damn about whether we really get into space. They say they give a damn, but what they really care about is the solid rocket motor industry or the mission planning industry at JSC or something else. I don't see them really concerned about whether we get into space, and they would be perfectly happy if we just kicked this can down the street a few years and kept people being, I mean, a senior staff member to a very senior appropriator, okay, told me explicitly, and I referred to this in my Space News op-ed this week, over a month ago. He said, the reason we need to start a heavy lift program now is because we need a program to put all the Constellation workers on. Okay? Now, if that's your first order merit, you know, figure of merit for your system, for your strategy, you know, where do you employ the people? Where do you give them all jobs? Because we want to be compassionate and take care of them. Then it's not about space anymore at all.
Right. Mark, do you have any questions for your fellow panelists? Jim, anything? Wait, let me. Okay, all right. Then let's move on, and we need to wait for the microphone to arrive. Let's start right here.
You mentioned that NASA might be buying 7 or 8 seats a year. Over the last 30 years, the shuttle has flown an average of 30 seats a year, occupied by astronauts or guest astronauts, even averaging over the stand-downs. Okay, 7 or 8 seats a year in the future. I know that's not all, but the old Roman saying of mountains go into labor, but a mouse is born. That concerns me. How is SpaceX or any of its competitors going to get their costs down if the flight rate is the equivalent of 1.25 Dragons a year? I mean, you are depending on the other partners and commercial stuff doing something very large compared to what you're doing to make it work. Is the rest of your plan consistent with that?
Well, it gets back to the business case, and I'm not sure, and it's not NASA's job to close the business case. This is what we've heard the administrator say several times. We have requirements for about 8 astronauts a year to and from the International Space Station. That is consistent with our increment strategy for the ISS, so those are our requirements, and that's what we're going to hopefully contract for. I personally believe that there is a big enough market to close the business case, but it goes back, I think Jim said it, we're going to have to wait and see. We're going to see how cost-effective, how effective we all three and everyone else here that work on the Commercial Crew Program in one way or another, either through advocacy or actually working on these systems, how successful we're going to be over the next 5 years. It is not a foregone conclusion that we're going to be successful because of all the challenges. I don't think the last word has been spoken on NASA's requirements. I do think there is potentially an opportunity to change our increment strategy, but right now, that's what it is. And I do believe that those are low numbers, and I'd like to get them up, and I'm working on that, but we'll have to see how that process plays out. As it stands right now, that's what, and NASA is all about requirements, believe me, those are our requirements for 8 astronaut flights per year, or not flights, seats, round trips, yeah, round trips, good point.
Any other comments on that?
Hey, Mark. So many questions, but only time for one. I noticed that in your charts that you were partnering with Virgin Galactic for the White Knight 2 for the drop testing and stuff, and I was just wondering, since Dream Chaser is skipping suborbit and just going straight for orbital development, can we expect no orbital vehicle out of Virgin Galactic? Or is Virgin Galactic going to stay with suborbit, and then Dream Chaser is going to be strictly orbit, or is Virgin Galactic going to end up being a competitor for you? Because it seems like you guys are partnering right now.
Yeah, I can't speak for Virgin Galactic. That's not my job. I think what we're doing is we're focusing on an orbital vehicle. I believe that Richard Branson and his group, they run airlines and they purchase the best airline, the best airplane that they can fly. And I think ultimately what will happen is if there are orbital vehicles doing the job, then they see an orbital tourism market that they will then go out and procure the seats. And instead of developing a vehicle on their own, it is a long and expensive process. They have focused in on the suborbital side. We're working on the motor development for them on that program, and our industry is one of partnerships. So at the end of the day, I believe, and I think the other companies in this industry believe that those who prove an orbital capacity that's reusable and affordable will get people from many different places to use it. And Virgin would then be a client like Airbus and Boeing sell vehicles to Virgin right now.
Here comes the mic.
Two questions. It seems the subtext of both this and the last session is that the Obama administration has been a fantastic friend, whatever their other policies, of human spaceflight. Do you agree? And the second is, which is perhaps more important, at different price points, what do you see the size of the market of taking people into space at, say, 50 million, which is the current price point, 10 million and 1 million, at a steady state? In other words, after some initial bump.
Who wants to take that?
Well, I'd like to, I'll take the first question, although I'm not part of the administration or part of the government. I think I'd rather characterize that instead of saying that they've been a friend. I think that they have recognized that change is needed. And it is a very difficult thing to make change. The program, as it was going, was not affordable, not sustainable, and when in our industry, when we look at stuff, we don't look at when do you start test flights. You ask the question, when are you getting into scheduled service? And when you ask that question, scheduled service was going to be many years, perhaps next decade. So I think what was recognized was that if there was going to be a program, that very hard, tough decisions had been made, and I give them credit for having the courage to stand up to do that, to stand up and say we have to find a way to make things different. On the second part of the question, it's interesting. One of the things that I talk about, I didn't say in my speech today, is that the reason, in my mind, one of the prime reasons we're all here today is because back in 1925 a decision was made, and it was called the Kelly-Airmerrill Act. And back then the government was facing the same decision they're facing now. Do we own the airlines? Do we own the infrastructure? Or do we support the building of an industry? Everywhere else in the world, the government made the decision we're going to own the airline. British Airways, Alitalia, Air France, Air Canada are all government-owned airlines. The United States was different. It said we're going to support the development of an industry. And they did that by saying we're going to fly mail on airlines, and that way we'll give you enough resources and revenue to get the business off the ground. And we're going to support and subsidize the building of airports and transportation and guidance systems. It's because of that that our industry in the United States grew to what it is, and I don't believe we would have had a vibrant space industry if we didn't have a vibrant airline industry before that. And I think we're facing the same kind of thing today, that what we're looking to do is to be able to drive the costs down. And if you go back and ask the question, how much did it cost to fly on an airline in 1925, and you equate it to today's costs, you'll find it's a pretty significant amount of cost. And we believe that there is a very large market. And it's more like we're sitting in Silicon Valley. No one knew what the internet was going to do until it got going. There are companies all over the internet right now that nobody imagined or dreamed of. We think that the space world is going to be the same thing. Once we have affordable and cheap transportation, cheaper transportation, we're going to have a lot of industries developing that weren't there right now.
As far as market projections, Chris Kraft, one of the great pioneers of the Apollo program, once told me that he couldn't prove there will be markets for the commercial sector in space, but he could prove that there will never be if we don't allow it and incentivize it. So that's a mantra that I think continues to be very useful as we talk about this. So I think proving that there are markets is not necessary. Let's at least enable them. So that's something to think about. Rick, did you have a question?
Yeah, the statement was made that your job is not to close the business case for the private sector orbitally. Conversely, I would submit that the government's job is not to destroy the business case And there is a strong argument that this crazy thing called Orion actually does destroy part of the business case. It's as if the government is giving you a spoonful of sugar and a spoonful of arsenic at the same time to create a self-fulfilling prophecy that there was inability. I know in the case of Boeing, it's been said, it wipes out the business case for them. The argument that it is some sort of an orbital lifeboat, I know from fairly good sources that the Dragon capsule can be converted to a lifeboat much more cheaply. They're already using geosatellite wiring in there. They can extend their life up to 15 years for far less than the $4 billion. I'm sure Boeing is the same. I'm sure the other companies have that capability for far less. Why keep Orion alive if it's going to potentially wipe out the possibility for these guys to work with NASA? Now, I will say that without NASA, they'll probably still continue, but the whole point is incentive here.
Good question.
Yes, Dennis, go ahead and tell us why Orion is being funded. Go ahead, Dennis.
That's the beauty of being moderator. I don't have to answer the tough questions.
Dennis Stone,
Thanks.
C-3PO office, Johnson Space Center, 281.
I used to consider Jim my friend. Until now.
Dennis Stone
Why
at
are
NASA.gov.
Why are we continuing?
Where's Deborah Warner from Space News? I think she's back. There she is. Space News is here, ready to write it down. And
okay, moving right along now. And does anyone really want to take a stab at that one? Particularly on the non-NASA couch.
Okay, listen. There is no question that NASA can and should be in the business of beyond Earth exploration. You need some sort of spacecraft for doing that. Okay? Orion is a pretty expensive spacecraft for doing even that, let alone for doing low Earth orbit transportation. I won't get into the issue of whether it's a good one for that or not, but at least it is originally designed for that purpose. I'm not going to speak for any companies that are interested in orbital spaceflight or commercial crew, but I suspect that if Lockheed Martin were fully engaged in developing such a spacecraft for exploration purposes, okay, as long as there was full funding and appropriate standards set up for commercial crew to go forward, nobody would have a problem. But when Congress comes back and says, oh, by the way, you have to use this has to be a backup, or even or we want to have it available by this date, or we want to have you use this launch vehicle for it, so that it can be, and we're going to do all these things to hamper and hinder commercial crew, then you have a legitimate concern. But I wouldn't want to talk about it as a concern of the companies. I would want to talk about it as a concern of the taxpayers, okay? Because doesn't really, I mean, yes, it matters to whether or not we get the industry or not if the companies are unhappy, but ultimately it should be we are the ones who have standing as taxpayers to say, why are we, doing one thing with one hand and doing something else that's, contravening. I mean, this is not space policy isometrics. We really want to, actually get there and do that and produce the result.
Thanks for answering. I'll let you be my friend again. All right. How about right in the back there? Yeah.
Hi, I'm not new to business, but I'm new to this industry, and I wanted to ask a question hypothetically about a world where government funding wasn't involved, government funding is no longer supporting this industry. A year from now, what target audience would be left, and what type of company would be serving them?
Yeah, I can maybe address that because this was one of my experiences with the Augustine Committee. We did see multiple companies come in and sort of pitch their perceived approach towards human space transportation to and from low Earth orbit. Consistently, everyone said that without any government support, that there was really no viable way for them to get a return on their investment, given the huge amounts of money that were associated with developing these systems and the very, very long lead time associated with getting that money back, that it just was not credible for any of those. And this was consistent across multiple small companies, large companies, traditional companies, non-traditional companies. It's in the Augustine report itself, where it said that the pretty consistent message was that in the foreseeable future, they didn't see that how that could be accomplished without some sort of government help. So I would say that would be the answer that I would give to that question.
Okay. I'll give you a chance now for your question. Did you still have one? Yeah. Okay.
I thought you were just going to pass me behind. I thought you were upset with me. To Mark, the question, and then to Jim also. Quick context, there are some other sectors in the U.S. that are experiencing the same lack of consistency of policy formulation and are also experiencing, election year results of this. So the energy sector has some partnerships that are experiencing it. There are some folks here who know about NextGen for DOT, and it's not gone through reauthorization. So at that level, when you think about it at that level, have you got any observations or ideas, Mark, about some structure of public-private formulation that possibly could provide consistency to the commercial sector and could also deal with the political issues about the job formation? They might, in one way, automatically appear to be mutually exclusive, but have you thought about, or has the Federation thought about a different structure that could bridge it?
I think, yes, we have thought about it, and we're actually trying to implement it. And one of the big unknowns, I think, or the things that hasn't really been out there is that when I spent time in Florida and in Texas, it's not the government employees who are at job risk loss. It's the contractors. As I understand it, and maybe the NASA folks can expand on this, I don't believe that there are any job cuts being planned for the government employees in either Florida or at Johnson. It's the contractor force. And so when we're looking at that, when you really come down to it, what are you doing? You're moving contractor employees from one company to another company. We've hired 500 people in the last year in my company, which is the way it should be, is that the industry should self-regulate it. People go to the jobs where companies are doing the work, and whether or not it's company A, B, C, or D. Now, what we're doing that's a little bit different is that we're reaching back into NASA saying we think that we can have NASA centers on our team, meaning that we're employing a certain amount of NASA people. Because why? Because they're brilliant people at NASA. What is the one thing that our industry doesn't have, and that is time? We're trying to move this as safely as possible within and as rapidly as possible. None of us want to recreate the wheel if we don't have to, which is why we're flying on an Atlas V. So if you think of that, our goal would be to try to figure out how we can use all those brilliant people who exist in the NASA system to help us out. And there are two ways that can be accomplished, and we'd like to see some government structuring around this. The first is encouraging that to happen so that the contracting process doesn't take a year for us to go out and sign a Space Act agreement where we're buying services from Ames or Langley. And the second is the NASA facilities, to allow companies to have reasonable access at reasonable cost to those facilities, to keep them alive, to keep them being used. Right now is very unclear. There are facilities in Ohio where we might do some testing, and they're unique. It's the only place that we can do them in the country. But it might take me 2 years to figure out how to get a contract to go up there and do that work. That's not going to work. So what we're trying to do is find a partnership, and I think one of my panelists had said that this is truly a partnership in our view. It's not just a contract one way. It's a partnership. NASA will have involvement and be there. At least in our case, we hope they're embedded in our company so that they can provide us as much data and information as possible and as much guidance as possible. But allowing for that kind of structure to happen, we think could be key, and in the encouragement of that in the funding process can be very helpful.
Reliable and cost effective. Those are the three sort of legs of the stool that we feel are very important for this program that need to be accomplished. So again, the vision is routine access to space for humans. We've been talking about that for decades, and I truly believe that the Commercial Crew Program is the next step in that direction. If we're successful, and there are a lot of challenges associated with this, both internal to NASA, external to our stakeholders, the technology, the business case, there's lots of challenges associated with this, but if we are successful, lot of benefits are going to flow. We believe this will strengthen the International Space Station program because it gives us another way to transport crew to and from space station. To dovetail on some of the remarks that we heard earlier today, we have this great space station. We need to be able to use it, and the way to use it is to have transportation for humans up and down. So we think it'll strengthen the International Space Station. It'll allow NASA to focus on beyond LEO. It will enhance our industrial base, contribute to the national economy, world peace. Okay, world peace may be going a little bit too far. But other than world peace, all those other things I do think are appropriate and would come to bear if we are successful. I'm going to really restrict my comments today to two areas, but I'm really looking forward to hearing what your questions are and happy to address those. The two issues that I get hit with most often are the business case for commercial crew and safety. So I'm just going to spend a couple minutes on that. In terms of the business case, I cannot, with a high confidence, say that we've got an analysis, a study that closes the business case for commercial crew. In any business case, you need the supply and you need the demand. These systems do not exist yet, so we don't know how much they're going to cost right now. We've got estimates. We're looking for our commercial providers to put forward some good, high-quality proposals in the future if the program gets approved. But today, not really sure on the supply side how much these systems are going to cost, so it's very difficult to definitively say for NASA that the business case can close. But what we can say is that there is demand for human space transportation to and from low Earth orbit. That is a historical fact. So when I hear comments in the media of this, future predicted market, I have to say I don't agree with that, because historically NASA and Russia have flown astronauts from other countries since 1978. And since that time, over that 30-year period, we have launched both between NASA and...
Hi, good morning. I'm Mark Sarangelo. I run Sierra Nevada Space Systems, and I'm also the chairman of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. And primarily today, I'm going to be speaking to those two topics. Where we are in our program, we were one of the award winners under the Commercial Crew Development Program, and we've been working that for a number of months now, and been working our orbital space vehicle program for about 5 years. I'll bring you up to date as to what where that is and what it's going to be looking like and what the prospects are, and also speak a little bit to the commercial spaceflight industry and where that is as a status.
So I'm Jim Muncie. I'm a space policy consultant in Washington. I'm one of the three co-founders of the Space Frontier Foundation. I'm not going to be speaking on behalf of any clients, although I do have clients that are working in the orbital human spaceflight arena. I'm going to try to I'm supposed to talk a little bit more about the political environment and policy environment and what's been going on in the last 6 to 7 months since the President's budget came out, and hopefully point some directions towards where we might go going forward so that commercial crew can move forward.
Well, very good. And so we'll follow a similar model as the last panel. We'll give a few remarks, have some discussion among ourselves, and then open the floor to questions, and perhaps maybe a final minute of wrap-up comments each. So I don't think I need to say anything in the way of context about the importance of getting to orbit and reducing the cost, increasing the reliability. I mean, that's certainly one of the great mantras of this organization, and so that would be preaching to the choir if I did that. But I think that's really our mindset. I work in the commercial crew and cargo program, or C3PO, as we affectionately call it. Actually, when we started, it was being called the Commercial Crew and Cargo Program, CCCP. And okay, so some of you are old enough to understand the negative connotations of that brand. So I asked Alan Lindemoyer, I said, "Are we in office?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "Oh, well, then let's call ourselves C3PO." So anyway, that's stuck. Anyway, and so we do several things, just kind of an introduction. We run the COTS program, Commercial Orbital Transportation Services, and I think most of you know what that is, so I won't belabor you with the details, but we have two funded partners, SpaceX and Orbital Sciences Corporation. We have a $500 million.
All right, welcome back. Up next, we have the Orbital Spaceflight panel, and orbital spaceflight has been restricted pretty much to only the wealthiest government programs since it's been a concept, basically. And the panels will now be discussing more commercial companies and what these companies are doing to open up Earth orbit to the general public. The moderator for this panel will be Dennis Stone, who is an assistant manager for commercial space development in NASA's Commercial Crew and Cargo Program, which manages the COTS initiative. Dennis Stone.
Thank you very much. Well, this builds very well on the last panel, which dealt with opening the suborbital to a wide variety of markets. And so now we're going to take it to the next level, literally, to LEO, and talk about not only the new services that are going to become available to open LEO, but also hopefully the markets and the demands for those services. And so we have a very, very distinguished panel. I'm going to follow Alan Stern's paradigm and let each one introduce themselves, starting with Phil.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. My name's Phil McAllister, and since February, I have been leading the planning at NASA headquarters for the Commercial Crew Initiative. So we've been busy trying to flesh that out and to put sort of meat on the bones as to what that program is, and I'll talk a little bit about that in my prepared remarks. In terms of my background, I have always been affiliated with the commercial space industry, even though this is my first time at this conference. But the two notable things with respect to sort of commercial crew that I was involved in historically was I was at Futron actually when we did the Futron-Zogby survey, so I oversaw that and was manager of that development effort and that survey and the forecast that we did. So that gave me a lot of insight into the demand for human space transportation. And then last year I was the NASA liaison to the Augustine Committee, so I was able to hear all the deliberations, participate in all the fact-finding associated with the Augustine Committee, which really set, in my opinion, set the stage for change that we needed in our human spaceflight program. So.
Very good. Dollar fund, and we treat that as an investment in the capabilities of the private sector. And then this International Space Station program then has purchased services from them. So we're an investor, and we're a customer. Now, Alan mentioned that Sir Richard, when he heard that they were going to buy tickets, was shining his shoes. And I don't think Elon Musk or David Thompson have shined any shoes. But anyway, be that as it may, that's certainly not one of the requirements of the program. But if they want to shine our shoes, I mean, certainly welcome to. But no, but they both are performing really well. As you know, the Falcon 9 had a very, very successful maiden launch recently. Their first COTS demo flight is coming up here. I think it's scheduled for September. And so they have 3 demos leading up to a test to the space station. Orbital Sciences doing a similar program, 1 test flight. They started later. We funded them later, but they're doing really, really well. They're building a launch site at Wallops, and they're making excellent progress. So COTS Cargo is going well, and as I say, Station has given them both very large contracts to deliver lots of cargo that we need on the space station for a several-year period. So this is it's an interesting model. It's a new model for NASA. Again, we when Mike Griffin set up, we have $500 million. And he fenced that very well for commercial cargo. We treated it as an investment. We hired a venture capitalist to help us think like an investor. We built agreements based on the Space Act and the special authority that NASA has, with milestones. And they build and test and fly. We pay incrementally, even financial milestones. If they're going to go raise money and have skin in the game, great. Well, show us the deposit in the bank, and we'll pay you as well. So all of that's negotiated in advance, and so it's been working quite well. So that's a $500 million program we manage, and then we also got $50 million of stimulus money. And as Mark mentioned, there's a Commercial Crew Development Program, which is basically beginning to work with the industry to mature their concepts and technologies. And so we have five partners, in addition to the fine work that the Sierra Nevada is doing, and actually you're the largest recipient of funding under that program, I might note. We also have the United Launch Alliance working on emergency detection system for the Atlas V and Delta IV. One of the steps that might be necessary to human rate those vehicles. Boeing is developing, I think Jim mentioned this in his opening remarks, a capsule that could be launched on any of those vehicles, and Bob Bigelow is one of their partners. Blue Origin, a company you may know of, founded by Amazon's Jeff Bezos. They're also a partner. They're working on some technologies of mutual interest, and of course they've got their eye on suborbital and then orbital, and so they're definitely an interesting player. And also Paragon, more at a subsystem level. They're working on some innovative life support technologies, and all this under stimulus money that we have for this year. So, and also using these Space Act agreements with the same paradigm of pay-as-you-go milestones. So this kind of sets a stage as we can talk about cargo, we can talk about crew, and we can talk about really any orbital space transportation issues that we want to get to today. So let's let our panelists have a few moments to give some remarks. Phil, we'll start with you.
Okay. Thanks, Dennis. Amazingly, I only have one slide, and it's just a graphic, so hopefully we can get that up soon. And we're still tweaking it. There it is. Can't quite get all of it. When we started the planning for this commercial crew program, we felt like we wanted to have a vision of where we were trying to get to eventually in the future, and that's why we developed this graphic. You can see where we're trying to integrate spaceflight operations. You can see the two different launch pads in the back with sort of ongoing routine aircraft aviation flights, and the space station up in the upper right-hand corner, because that is, for NASA, the near-term milestone. So the commercial crew program, if it gets approved by Congress, is designed to invest in the capability to transport humans to and from low Earth orbit. And once that capability is matured and shown to be safe, reliable, and cost-effective, NASA hopes to be a partner, a customer in the near term to purchase those services to transport our crew up and down from the International Space Station. So those are the three safe,